Here to discuss, Stephanie Nilva, Executive Director of Day One, an organization working to end dating abuse and domestic violence. Also, Jennifer Gerson, reporter at the 19th. And Stephanie, we thought we were sort of like in this post-Me Too moment where we were believing people who came forward. We were taking their stories very seriously. How did we get to a point where we're right back to victim blaming? I mean, like full out and out victim blaming.
Hi, Zurlina, and thanks for having me on. I would like to think that we have not completely backslid into the universe you're describing. I think that there are steps forward and steps backwards, and we are definitely in a moment where this celebrity case is drawing a lot of attention, is raising a lot of questions. I like to think it is increasing the amount of conversation, and often that can be a good thing.
I hope so. Jennifer, in your piece for the 19th, you wrote, you quote a sociologist, who studies intimate partner violence, and she said that defamation cases are often a punishment for leaving an abusive situation. I mean, how could this trial itself become a blueprint for abusers in the future who might tell their victims, don't report or talk about this because I'll sue you for defamation like Johnny Depp?
Yeah, this came up a lot in reporting this story. Everyone I spoke to, attorneys and sociologists, all mentioned that they anticipated that this would have that kind of effect. People think that because of just the amount of attention this case is getting, especially on social media, the way that this is just being talked about so heavily, really high-resourced, high-functioning abusers now have a named way of saying to people, someone said in the story too, there was a quote saying, I'm going to Depp you. There's this idea of if you speak out about this, there is a very public example now of a mechanism using the civil litigation model that you could continue abuse and harassment with a person by bringing a defamation suit and kind of flipping this previously held belief that speaking out about abuse was a form of protected speech. That seems to no longer be the case based on how this trial is taking place and playing out, and the focus on details of their relationship rather than the act of defamation itself.
And Stephanie, one of the things that struck me when I watched the clips of this trial throughout is that Amber Heard is not the quote unquote perfect victim, or this archetype that doesn't actually exist, because nobody is the perfect victim. I mean, tell us how some of the inconsistencies in her stories could be a response to trauma, and how often you see that in cases where you're talking and counseling survivors.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that the myth of the perfect victim is something that gets out there in the media, where we pick apart the stories, the claims, the experiences, the genuine, authentic lives of people who are bringing accusations based on their trauma, violence they've experienced, and so on. I mean, you see this with police violence and racist violence as well, where somebody's pickpocketed somebody 20 years ago, and all of a sudden that becomes as if they deserved the experience they've had. I think for Amber Heard specifically, when you hear questions in the courtroom about whether she's committed her funds to charities or fully paid those pledges and so on, it is so irrelevant to what her genuine experience in her relationship was. So it is a really dangerous road to go down. And I think the salacious opportunities there for media are really risky, because it ends up with these headlines that are intended to lure people in. Too often, media enterprises are money-making ventures, and they are looking for eyeballs on words and so on, and they are likely to overstate or misdirect a conversation where somebody's experience gets lost in that.
And Stephanie, just a follow-up question. One of the things that keeps coming up in the testimony is this idea that there's mutual abuse, or that was what was happening in this particular relationship. And I actually want to take it outside of the context of these two and talk about instances of mutual abuse. You work with young people, and I think it's really important to frame it that way. I mean, what do you sort of teach young people in terms of healthy relationships, intimate relationships, as opposed to how they can go down the path of abusive ones? Because the idea of mutual abuse, I'm not saying that that doesn't exist. It very much does. I don't know if it applies to this case, but it is an important thing to hone in on here.
Right. And particularly when you're working with young people, as Day One does, we have conversations about the difference between disagreement, conflict, warning signs, abuse. There's a progression, there's a continuum. And we want to make sure that young people understand the elements of a healthy relationship when we go into classrooms and youth programs and talk to teens and adolescents about what the relationships are that they would like for themselves and the people around them. So mutual abuse is certainly something that happens. I think, again, it can be a risky conversation in the sense that typically in areas of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, whichever language you're choosing, there is what is in our jargon called, a primary aggressor, someone who is exercising the control or attempting to control another person. And there's a difference between toxic behavior. There's a difference between high conflict and actual cases of domestic violence. And the case between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, there was clearly a lot of conflict. There was violence. There's documented instances of both of them doing things that are dangerous to another person. I think the question is whether one person was exercising control over the other person, whether she felt she couldn't make decisions for herself. And those are some of the allegations she's made. So I think it's that area that you want to focus on and genuinely determining, is this a case of domestic violence or are these people who don't get along? When we talk to young people, we want to make sure they understand that you can disagree in a healthy way. I want pizza, you want a sandwich is not abusive, and you never want to eat the place I want to eat is not a harmful relationship. There are ways to resolve conflict in functional ways.
I'm so happy I had you today because I wanted to talk about the healthy relationships as well. Jennifer, we only have one more minute, but what are some of the ways in which what's happening in the trial and what's happening on social media, they're not coinciding? What are some of the distinctions between the coverage and what's actually happening?
Well, I think, again, it's really important to focus on the fact that this is a defamation trial and that what is being tried in this case is whether Amber Heard defamed Johnny Depp. He's alleging that she defamed him through writing an op-ed for the Washington Post where she identified as a survivor of domestic violence. She never named Johnny Depp. She never pointed to a certain year, but people felt that because of the nature of what she was saying and things that were already public in the past about allegations she had made about domestic violence. There had been a police report. I think she had tried to get a restraining order, that it must be Johnny Depp. And so he was saying he was unable to work because of this. And so I think it's really important to focus where his side needs to prove that his inability to work and the fact that he has not been getting jobs is because of this one op-ed where he is not named. And that's really different than what we're seeing on social media, especially where it's kind of become this battle of stan culture and people upset about seeing a favorite movie star and celebrity hearing things about him that maybe they don't want to hear, and this turning into something of questioning the credibility and experiences of someone else as a result.
Stephanie Nilva and Jessica Gerson, thank you so much for being here. It's a really important conversation. Please stay safe.